This is PlayStation 5, and it's Sony's latest next-generation game console, succeeding the wildly popular PlayStation 4. The company has always made it very easy and straightforward with their naming convention, and certainly with their hardware design alone. You'll know right away this is Sony's new machine. After spending over 2 months with PS5, and at the time of writing and preparing this review, I think at this point we can take a look at the console more critically and get a better idea of how it's shaping up, and what ownership could look like long term. And that's what we really have to keep in mind when doing a critical review of an entire platform. Ownership can start at any point, and this is a device that will sit in the market for a long time. It will evolve and adapt through system software updates, hardware revisions, plenty of game releases, so while it should go without saying, PS5 right now does have some growing pains. Let's briefly go over the console spec sheet. PS5 is an x86 based machine. The CPU is 8 Zen 2 cores capped at a variable frequency of 3.5 GHz. The GPU is a custom variant of AMD's RDNA 2 microarchitecture with 36 CUs capped at 2.23 GHz. Memory is 16 GB of GDDR6. Internal storage is a highly customized SSD with 825 GB, and the disc-based console has a UHD Blu-ray drive, now utilizing 100 GB discs. Other key points of interest include hardware-supported ray tracing, an extra slot inside the machine for M2 SSD expansion, a new specialized audio chip called the Tempest 3D Audio Tech, support for Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5.1, and HDMI 2.1 for TVs and monitors that support a 4K 120Hz refresh rate. On the console, you'll find your power and eject buttons towards the bottom, and a high-speed USB-A and USB-C port closer to the middle. On the back, you've got 2 more USB-A, Ethernet, HDMI, and power. The console weighs about 4.5 kilograms for the disc model, 3.9 kilograms for the digital edition. From a vertical position, PS5 is 390mm tall, 260mm wide. If it wasn't already obvious, the only difference between disc and digital is the disc drive. Apart from that, and just a slimmer profile on the digital edition, they're the same. We'll talk more about performance later. For now, at least, let's go over what is easily considered more of a subjective matter, the console design. My gut reaction back in June during the reveal was that I liked it a lot.
Dude, wow! This looks really good!
And with the console here, I still do. PS5 without a doubt follows Sony's design philosophy in that this is a box with its own identity versus other PlayStation products. You'll know right away this is a PS5, and moreover, you'll know it's a PS5 versus literally anything else in your household. Not only is this thing large, but the two-tone design makes it stand out, especially with the accent lighting that beautifully reflects off the fins. It's a styling cue that, to me, nails the intended contemporary design language. For others, it looks too much like a rendition of a Jetsons console, and I can certainly see that point of view. Some of the problems though, this design requires a stand, which thankfully Sony supplies, and in a vertical orientation it does the job just fine because it screws in from the bottom. Horizontal, the stand works, but it's not very secure. I can guarantee you the first time you need to access the rear USBs and you just naturally try to move the whole machine to get a better reach, the stand will fall out of place. And it seems like right now, a lot of people don't realize that you need the stand in the first place. The console doesn't sit flat from this orientation, and that's new for a lot of people who expect to set it and forget it like they always do with consoles. So as elegant as I think PS5 looks, it's potentially problematic for the uninformed. The center section is a glossy black plastic, and again, I actually do like this a lot, but glossy black plastic is the weakest material out there. You can try as hard as you can, but this will collect micro scratches very easily. And something I've noticed with PS5s out of the box is that the light strip is susceptible to breaking up the continuous line. So you can see on my main unit here that it has 2 cracks where there is a noticeable tiny fracture in the strip. These are just a handful of smaller things that added up make the console feel a little less premium. Though one of the coolest things is that the giant white panels are removable very easily. It just takes some careful prying, no screws at all. This doesn't even void your warranty because this is what you would do in the event that you want to install an additional M2 drive. Not only does this make it super easy to maintain and clean the console, with the fan being right there, but this allows consumers to easily customize their own plates. So if it's the white color that bothers you, painting or dipping the shells is a great alternative. At first glance, the DualSense seems like a radical departure for PlayStation controllers. After all, this is the one area where the company has broken up their naming continuity. But when looking back, the DualShock 4 is still considered the revolution from DualShock 1 through 3. The DualSense now feels like a natural, albeit more bold and aggressive evolution from the outgoing model. You still have a touchpad, a share button, which is now named the create button, and a more subtle light bar which accents well around the touchpad. Though these things realistically have to be brought forward for reliable backwards compatibility. Removing the touchpad would dramatically complicate matters, and while the light bar isn't needed this time around, it's likely here to avoid any issues from PS4 software that utilized it by altering the colors. Either way, this controller feels like a distant but very stylish cousin of the DualShock 4. Just to run down more of the changes though, the controller is a bit bulkier, similar to Microsoft's pads. The buttons are transparent, there's no longer a gap between R1, L1 and R2 and L2, that's a first for PlayStation. Battery size on paper is a 50% increase over DualShock 4, you've got USB-C for charging, a microphone built in, there's haptic feedback vibrations, and adaptive triggers that can create tension and resistance when pushing them down. In hand, the DualSense is hefty and well built, so much so that it feels like a dramatic quality jump from DualShock 4. Spend enough time with this, then grab a DualShock 4. It's amazing just how cheap that will feel now compared to the DualSense. Quality alone is great, but comfort can be more subjective. The larger size might be an issue for some, but I've always felt Microsoft had some of the more comfortable controllers around, spanning across 360, X1, and the new Series line. DualSense feels closer to that, and I love it. The headline features, though, are the adaptive triggers and haptic feedback. Right now, Sony's preloaded free game Astro's Playroom is the only title that will really demonstrate what these features can do. Much like Joy-Con HD Rumble, DualSense can give off vibrations that have a level of presence and weight. Where traditional Rumble is two weighted motors, this utilizes actuators that can be more fine-tuned from the developer's perspective. In Astro, that's demonstrated from subtle tapping as you walk across sand, or a very slight but prolonged vibration skating on ice. Or perhaps an aggressive sensation felt from just one side of the controller. These are just a few examples. Now, the adaptive triggers are interesting. The developer can create resistance when pushing down L2 or R2. Pulling back an arrow can have tension as you start aiming. In Bugsnax, when you snap a photo, there's a tension point about halfway down that once you push past it, it genuinely feels like a responsive click as if you snapped a photo from a DSLR camera. When you combine this with the haptic feedback, it creates a unique symmetry that we just haven't really seen before. Astro was designed around showcasing all these features, and it does it very well, but it's also somewhat exaggerated. Most games likely wouldn't need or even want to use it to the same degree Astro has, but it is the benchmark and even inspiration for other developers to reference. A handful of PS5 games so far have used these features in a more subtle manner, but there's plenty of good examples so far. And there is always the worry that these features fade into obscurity as another launch gimmick, but right now there's a lot more to enjoy with these versus, say, the touchpad's introduction in 2013, or say 6-axis in 2006. There is a wow factor here the first time you feel the DualSense do its thing. So while it's still on developers to really take advantage of these features, what's there is really exciting and genuinely fun to use. It is worth pointing out though that if for whatever reason you do need these features turned off, you can do so in settings. The PS5's user interface is completely new and built to leverage the incredibly fast SSD. To give you a quick breakdown, like PS4, your home screen will show a horizontal row of applications, except this time around, your games and streaming apps are separated, so you can hit R1 or L1 to swap between them. The PlayStation Store is on the far left and it's built right into the UI. It's not an application you launch, all the content is loaded in and ready to go so you can start surfing the store right away. The same is true for things like claiming your PS Plus games or using PlayStation Now. You don't launch anything, it's just there. The far right will show you your game library. This is a handy way to get a bird's eye view of everything you have or have had. It's also worth pointing out that for pretty much all these pages, you have sorting options or tabs that give you a better breakdown of what it is that you're looking for. If that's not enough, the main home screen has a search icon in the top right you can hit, and that will let you search anything on the entire console. The option for settings is also in the top right, alongside your avatar icon to see things like your profile, trophies, switching users, things like that. The main interaction and navigation feature you'll be using is called the Control Center. This is sort of like the quick menu on PS4, or even the XMB that sat above the icons on PS4, except for this, you can summon these settings pretty much anywhere on the console. One tap of the PS button brings this up, and this will let you easily access the switcher, notifications, friends, music, quick settings, devices, power, all sorts of stuff. On top of the Control Center, if you're playing a game for example, you'll see these giant cards. These have a few different functions. They could be locked trophies to see what you're working towards, they could be recent screenshots, official game news, or they could be points of interest in a game. And this is where you could actually select one of these and it will jump you right to that point in the game. These are contextual, so it will depend on the game you're playing and how the developer has used them, but these can let you easily access single-player missions or multiplayer lobbies, they could be fast travel, and utilizing these will let you bypass the in-game menu. You can even access cards from the main home screen under each game. Combine this feature with PS5's fast SSD, and you could be darting all around your software quickly and effortlessly, and it does indeed work that way. PS5 games can start in just a few seconds, it's incredibly quick, so using a card to skip the in-game menus makes it even quicker. With that foundation now set, you can get an idea of what the overall user experience could be, but having spent enough time with PS5, some things are starting to really stick out. The first being presentation. PS5 is all around a clean, easy to look at interface. Game pages are far less cluttered, whereas PS4 had a little too much going on. The applications themselves are smaller, allowing more of the background graphics to dominate the screen, and the Control Center takes up very little screen real estate versus the quick menu on PS4. Even game-based, the new area where your friends and parties live is a pop-up box. It's as if Sony wanted you to spend more time looking at imagery instead of text. For the most part, I like the cleaner look. Removing clutter is always good, but areas like the PlayStation Store do suffer. Big images take priority, and you have to spend a lot more time looking for what you want. And in many cases, you can't even see the current sales. A lot of the time you have to know exactly what you're looking for, and sometimes you just want to casually browse the store and see what you run into, but that's less of a thing here. It's quick and clean, but a huge step back on discovery. Something else you'll start to notice is that the experience feels isolated. The What's New feed, where you can see your recent friend activities on PS4, that's gone. And Game Base is fine, but it's 3 extra button presses to see all your friends, requests, and messages. It feels tucked away. Trophies too. They feel like an afterthought as there's too much button pressing needed to see the full list of a game that you might be working on. And then perhaps the biggest issue people are having right now is that in order to get to the home screen, it's a long press of the PS button. This is reversed from PS3 and PS4, so if you've been on PlayStation for say upwards of 14 years, then you've got a lot of muscle memory fighting you, because a single press of the PS button is always going to bring up the Control Center first. Sony likely did this because they want you to use the Control Center, and more importantly, they want you to use cards. Now, one of two things can happen here. A software update is introduced to switch this or make it an option, which a lot of people would likely do, and then the overall user habit would fall back to the PS3 and PS4 experience, cold booting games, relying less on the control center, and not using cards, and that's not really what Sony wants. Or they could improve the control center to where it does most of what you need it to do, add more configuration, trophy options, friend activities, so on and so forth. This is probably the more likely road, I suspect. There's a reason why Sony started their UI reveal in September with cards, because they want them to be the hallmark feature. And so far, personally, I haven't used them too much, but this is partly due to the software I've been playing. Demon's Souls, for example, where I put in over 70 hours, is a game where fast travel means you lose the souls that you're carrying. That's not the UI's fault, it's just something that's part of the game. So if I use an activity card to travel in Demon's Souls, I have to drop my souls. Then Astrobot had fast travel available right away in the menu, so I often just use that. So right now, I think it's still too early for cards before we know just how useful they are, but the result is definitely going to fall on the games that you're playing. One thing I have appreciated so far though is the tracking, estimated time, and game help. So that's another thing the cards can do for you. They can display how long a level might take to beat, you can track collectibles, and while very few games support this, you can actually see tips on the area that you're in if you're a PS Plus member. I actually did use this for Demon's Souls. The short videos were quick, and it was just brief text giving me a better idea of how I should approach the area that I'm currently in. And that was substantially faster than heading to YouTube, picking a video, skimming through the video with no timestamps, and then ultimately not finding the answer I was looking for, thus having to click back to find a different video. Then I see a video with a spoiler in the thumbnail, and that's where I also applaud PS5. I can totally see where they were going with game help, and this is something I'd like to see more of. Of course, the number one reason why anyone would want a gaming console is to actually play games, and right now, in terms of the launch lineup in the first few months, PS5 has a strong start. This is arguably one of the best lineups available for a new console, with an absolutely beautiful remake of Demon's Souls, a short but sweet experience with Spider-Man Miles Morales, and the fun, casual 3D platformer Sackboy: Big Adventure. Third-party games, you've got the likes of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, Watch Dogs Legion, The Pathless, Godfall, that's a little lukewarm, but something that you might enjoy. This is an area where if nothing speaks to you right now, that's okay. It takes time for any console to see its library grow, and the upcoming software for PS5 is looking bright, with a lot of announcements already made from SIE, and plenty of third-party games coming too. So this is a category where we'll be focusing more on game performance and what PS5 is capable of early on. Which, mind you, this is also an area that will improve with time, so we're still in a cross-generation period where most games are still shipping on PS4. So right now we've long been approaching the landscape of diminishing returns. From a visual perspective, this isn't necessarily a leap that will blow you away, or at least not in the same manner that you might have seen 2 decades ago. But still, these native PS5 games look gorgeous. Demon's Souls is yet again our good example here, with high-resolution textures, tons of breakable objects littering the environment, and a 60 FPS performance mode. Miles Morales also looks stunning, especially with a recently introduced ray tracing performance mode. That's one of the bigger takeaways here, is that it's becoming more commonplace for console games to offer where you want your performance to go. For decades, it's been very commonplace in game development to sacrifice your frame rate for visual fidelity. It's always the first to go. But with resolution reconstruction methods and a greater desire for options, we're seeing a lot of developers implement performance settings like PS4 Pro. So you can choose native 4K at 30 FPS or knock it down to a base resolution that's dynamic in 60 FPS. Depends on the game, of course, but some are even allowing 120 frames per second. It's just incredible to finally have this become standard amongst some of the larger budget games that could really use it. And for PS5 specifically, the console's performing very well. If you've always preferred playing on a console, the jump in resolution and frame rate in most games alone will look fantastic. Same with ray tracing. This is where a game's lighting will accurately bounce and reflect off objects, and it looks stunning. So one of the biggest aspects of PS5 is its highly custom solid-state drive. Sony's been touting the incredible speeds this can deliver, combined with their 12-channel custom controller that drives all the data in parallel so that there's no bottlenecks. And the results really are impressive. PS5 games boot up in a matter of seconds, and in most cases you can skip any splash screens and get into actual gameplay in under 10 to 15 seconds from a cold boot from the home screen. And when playing games, respawn or fast travel, that's also a matter of seconds. This is a huge quality of life jump that can't be undermined. If you get used to this, it'll be tough going back to anything else. The only drawback is the limited storage capacity, where your usable space is roughly 600 gigabytes out of the box. That's going to go quick with a handful of your typical retail games, but as we mentioned earlier, there is an expansion slot inside the console, which right now it's disabled. We're still waiting for Sony to enable this and let consumers know which third-party drives will be available. This is unfortunate but necessary since PS5's current SSD is so fast, so any additional M2 drives will need to be just as fast in order to be compatible. But either way, this is still a great benefit. Third-party drives will come down in price over time, and technically speaking, this is an expansion, so you'd still keep the 600 gigabytes of storage you have on top of what you end up buying. There is a downside here though, because PS5's SSD is soldered onto the board. Having it go bad means the whole console goes bad, so it's a trade-off that might look grim long term. In the meantime, external drives work for PS4 games, so if you know you'll be playing PS4 titles, move those to the external storage. Especially since you can't store PS5 games to external storage and then say move them back over later to play them off the SSD. You can't do that. So in any situation where you run out of SSD space, you'll have to delete or reinstall when necessary, which is a bummer. Now, another key principle of PS5 is keeping this console properly cooled so that the fans don't operate loudly. This was a big problem with PS3, PS4, PS4 Pro, and so with PS5, Sony's implemented a few things here: liquid metal cooling instead of traditional thermal paste, a massive heat sink, a large fan, and a CPU and GPU with variable frequencies tied to a power budget. The frequencies are interesting because it's basically a reverse boost clock. PS5 is always operating at the top end, and it will only dip on taxing situations. For all my playtime so far, I can safely say the console is indeed mostly quiet. Mind you, the fans and disc spinning will kick in periodically, or when you're actually copying a game from disc. The PS5 will certainly sound very noisy there, but that stops after a minute or two. During regular operation, PS5 is quiet, with a slight caveat. One of the early issues that we're seeing is coil whine. So for those that don't know, coil whine is an audible buzzing that you can hear, and this is caused by the physical parts in the power supply or anything that transfers power. It's vibrating enough for you to actually hear it. And a surefire way to know that it is coil whine is to change what the PS5 is doing. This is an issue that can plague PC parts, and it's happened on consoles before, but in this situation, it's getting a bit more attention since PS5 is so quiet to begin with. So if you had this issue on, say, PS4 Pro, you probably didn't notice since the console's fan noise easily drowned it out. PS5 is extremely quiet, so depending on your sensitivity to sound, you might be able to hear coil whine if your console has it. Now, it's worth pointing out, most PC part manufacturers do not consider this a defect, and Sony probably won't either, so if you have it, you have it. It doesn't actually affect operation negatively or anything like that. I'm sure a soft model revision will eventually change the power supply and probably address this issue, or at least ideally, that's what'll happen. So this time around, PS5 supports backwards compatibility with the vast majority of PS4 games, and this is due to the consoles having a similar architecture. And for those unaware, that's the exact reason why PS4 never played nicely with PS3. We've done extended videos and topics on this already, so we won't dive into that explanation here. But getting back to PS5, it can not only play PS4 games, but improve performance of them dramatically. In most situations, PS5 can improve load times and boost the frame rate. In others, PS5 can improve the resolution. This is highly dependent on the game you're playing and how it was made on PS4. So with frame rate, if a PS4 game is, say, locked at 30 FPS, then PS5 can't do much other than keep it at a consistent 30, which is still incredibly helpful if, say, a PS4 game struggled to hold 30. PS5 will brute force it and keep it at a solid frame rate. Now, if the frame rate is unlocked in a game, PS5 will almost always push it to 60 and hold it. Loading times for the most part will see a huge reduction thanks to the fast SSD, but there's certainly limitations there as well. PS4 games weren't made to acknowledge that kind of I/O throughput, so you can easily see a reduction of a few seconds, maybe even up to a minute, but games aren't going to boot or load levels as quickly as, say, native PS5 games. Resolution could be improved if the game supports a dynamic resolution. This was less common, so it's not something that you'll see often, but definitely an area where PS5 will push it to its cap of 1080p or 4K depending on that game. In the situation of 4K, that would be a PS4 title that had a Pro option, and PS5 will always default to the PS4 Pro setting if there is one, and then improve it from there, which is great since most PS4 Pro settings often had performance toggles with dynamic res or unlocked frame rates. All around, the experience of playing PS4 games on PS5 is fantastic, and it's a no-compromise experience. You're not stuck waiting for PS5 games to come out, and you're not sacrificing anything for playing older games. PS5 still communicates with PS4 consoles, so you don't lose your friends, parties, online play, nothing. The only hiccup with backwards compatibility is that there's about 100 titles out of the 4,000 total that might showcase odd behavior. These games are playable, but when starting them, you'll receive a warning that it might act a little strange, and that can mean things like running into weird graphical artifacting. Some of the titles that I've played that displayed this message didn't even have anything noteworthy pop out, so your mileage will vary here. There's also an extremely small list of games that don't work at all, so just an FYI if you happen to own one of these games. We can also quickly point out that PlayStation VR is supported on PS5, though with this there's a little more hassle involved. You need to request a camera adapter from Sony using the serial number of your current headset. It's completely free and they'll usually send one out to you in a week or so, but you will need this adapter to plug in your PS4 camera. You will also have to use DualShock 4 since there's no way for a DualSense to be tracked from the camera like how PSVR worked on PS4. And thankfully these games still can see boosted performance, but all around using PSVR on PS5 does feel a little tacked on. It's great that compatibility is there, but it is a little more involved on PS5. Finally, there's next generation game upgrades, one of the other huge consumer-friendly benefits that we're seeing. There's about 40 to 50 games so far, possibly more, that have a next-gen upgrade available right now, or one that's coming out, and most of them are free. You might be walking into a console where you already have PS5 games waiting for you based on what you have for PS4. This helps ease that transition even more, and better yet, if you're a PS Plus member, you're walking into the PS Plus collection, a benefit where you can freely download 20 fantastic PS4 games. Being an early adopter for any product can often be a painful or lesser experience, but for PS5, there's a really compelling case here. There's a lot that comes with it. Another key area Sony spent a lot of time on with PS5 is 3D audio. The Tempest 3D audio tech is hardware level support, so you can bring in almost any headphones and start using those to experience 3D audio in supported games. The console has 5 audio profiles to choose from, and it is important to pick the one that sounds best to you. Everyone hears sound differently, so choosing the right setting will provide the best level of immersion, though Sony makes it a point to say that down the road they will offer more options, as these current ones aren't going to be a one-size-fits-all. And that's probably the biggest caveat here. It's tough to say this is a killer feature when in reality you may very well be a fringe case that can't necessarily notice the level of immersion that's being advertised. For now, Sony's launch games all support 3D audio, and for me personally it's been hit or miss. Astro's Playroom sounded flat to me. I couldn't really notice or make out anything around me, whereas Demon's Souls sounded excellent. Running through Stonefang Mines or the Tower of Latria was haunting and ghoulish as I could make out all these uncomfortable noises happening around me. There was absolutely a noticeable amount of presence. Whether it was behind me, to the side, or even below, it worked well and I really enjoyed it. Like many aspects we've gone over so far, the experience is probably going to vary widely depending on what you're playing. Something as upbeat and carefree as Astro arguably doesn't have much to gain from 3D audio versus, say, an upcoming horror experience like Resident Evil Village. That, in my mind, is where you'll want 3D audio to succeed most, and based on what I've played so far, I'm cautiously optimistic for what's to come. PlayStation 5 is in many ways a really creative take on what a next-generation console should look like in a world where graphical jumps aren't the be-all, end-all metric to judge anymore. There's obviously a massive performance increase here over PS4 and PS4 Pro, but Sony has opted for more sensory experiences with the DualSense and 3D audio. And while there's still a lot of uncertainty about how well these features will be utilized, these are without a doubt some of the most convincing and engaging features we've had so far on a console. And I'm incredibly pleased with the overall proposition Sony has made here as far as a new console is concerned. You can walk into this machine with your PS4 games playing better than ever, continuing communication with friends online, accessing the Plus collection for some fantastic games. You're set up very well the moment you buy this thing. And that's never really been the case when a new generation starts, certainly not to the degree with this one. Now, you may have noticed I haven't mentioned anything about technical issues or problems with the hardware, and that's because, well, I haven't had many. My big one is that on the very first day, for whatever reason, PS4 games weren't launching. I did a system restore and that solved it. Since then, it's been smooth sailing. And that's one concern that many have reached out to me for, asking, is it safe to use rest mode? Are external drives working correctly? I heard game upgrades are acting weird, has that happened to you? I'm not saying these issues aren't real, but I just haven't run into them personally. And that's the perception thing. Those with issues will be vocal online, and those without will happily play their PS5s and not randomly write, my PS5 works. So for me, I'm in that category. Mind you, there have been reported technical issues, so something might happen, but at a glance, those issues appear to be far and few between. Over time, I'd like to see where the UI goes. That's an area that needs some work, and that's sort of expected, but the thing is, there's a good amount of features already in place, they just aren't as intuitive. The interactions feel lonely, certain settings and screens are moved or tucked away, and it's been 2 months. Some of these things aren't becoming the new norm, they're just becoming more problematic with continued use. Then there's the coil whine, some of the quality issues with the hardware we mentioned earlier. There's plenty we can continue to nitpick, but thankfully it's just that, nitpicking. PlayStation 5 is off to a great start, and with consoles, delayed satisfaction is always best because you can wait for the library to grow, new features get added, there's updated hardware, cheaper prices, but right now there's plenty of instant satisfaction, and from this point forward, it's probably only going to get better. Thank you everyone for watching. It was finally time for me to do my own formal PS5 review. And up to this point, of course, we've already done things like reviewing all the accessories, PS Now, UI deep dive, noise and heat test, all those things. I'm going to link those down below, but we have a lot more topics to still go over. So if you haven't yet, please subscribe for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter at Mystic Ryan, and that is it. I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.